I'm Crystal Keating, and this is the Joni and Friends Ministry Podcast. Each week, we're bringing you real conversations about disability and finding hope through hardship, and sharing practical ways that you can include people impacted by disability in your church and community. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss any of our encouraging conversations. You can also find all of the helpful resources that we've talked about at joniandfriends.org/podcast. I'm sitting down with John and Sue Meyer today, a couple who serves with Joni and Friends in the mission fields as teachers and counselors to Word of Life missionaries and students. John and Sue were the loving parents of their daughter Rachel, who lived 27 years with significant disabilities and recently passed away. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
I'm glad to be here.
You're welcome.
Tell me, how did you guys meet and how long have you been married?
Go ahead.
Do you want me to start that?
Our story of how we met is usually a little different. But
So it varies depending on which one of us tell the story. We met when I was in the youth group. I was 18, so just on the tail end of the youth group. And John came down to do pretty much everything that the senior pastor did not do. So he was the youth director, which inspired me to come more often. So that's how we met. Yeah, that was a good motivator. And we started dating shortly after you arrived. Yeah. My brother and John played soccer together just for fun, and so I would come and watch, and then we started getting to know each other better from there.
We'd go to the beach together on Sunday afternoons, and I was a teacher also in a Christian school, and so she would help me grade papers.
Oh, very nice. And you were living in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the beaches out there are quite lovely.
Oh, they're lovely. Yeah.
Oh.
This
And
is
romantic.
West Coast of Florida. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was it. I was obviously not dating anybody. I came down from college and saw her in the back of the church one day, and I asked the pastor's son, who I was real involved with, and I said, "Is that girl back there dating anybody?" And he said, "I think she broke up not too long ago." And I said, "So she's available for dating?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I approached her after church one Sunday and said, I don't know whether it was, would you like to go to the beach together? Would you like to go out to dinner or something? And
I think dinner. I think it was the dinner, the first one. Yeah.
And I swept her off her feet immediately. She couldn't.
There's a story there for sure.
This is where the husband-wife differ.
The story differs a little bit.
Yeah, because before John arrived, we were told for weeks and weeks and weeks at the church that this wonderful man was coming, and he was going to be wonderful at so many things. And wonderful, wonderful, that's all we heard all the weeks before he arrived. And so when he finally got there, by that time, we were all a little tired of hearing about John Meyer. And we thought, surely he could not be that wonderful. But he was. Lo and behold, he really was.
The guy is wonderful.
Well, that's a good start in my book.
Yeah.
It was.
We were engaged that December. Yeah. Married the next summer. 7/7/79.
You know, right?
Well, we started. It was March. March is when we met, and then it was December that we were engaged.
And then
so we've been married. We're coming up on 41 years.
Yeah, praise God.
Mm-hmm.
It's been awesome.
That's amazing. So it sounds like you were in the ministry and you were part of the youth group, or, on the tail end of it. Did you always plan to be in the ministry? I mean, here you are, you're working with Word of Life. You're a pastor now in Florida. Was that your plan?
When I left college and went to Florida, it was supposed to be for 1 month to fill in for a woman who was sick. It ended up I stayed at that ministry for 19 years.
Oh, my goodness.
So when I got there, I wasn't planning on anything. I was just going in to teach.
Yeah.
5th and 6th grade. That's what. But then
that was your main. Main
My
job.
degree was in secondary ed.
Ah, okay.
They didn't even have a high school at that time, so I went in and taught whatever they needed.
Right.
But they also needed a coach and a PE teacher, and then a choir director and a youth pastor. So in a matter of a month, I was doing all those things.
Because you were so wonderful.
Well, that's what I hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I was so wonderful.
Well, God had a plan.
Yeah, God had a plan. And she became, my partner in the ministry and youth group, from day one. And
yeah.
It was not as intentional on my part. I was young, 18.
Sure.
And turned 19 before we were married. So for me, it was never thinking of this is what I want to do. That I wanted to be an astronaut. So
we're still working on that.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen now. But so for me, it was not intentional. It was just, this is what we were doing. And it was a quick catch up. I know the pastor of our church really took us both aside and said, hey, you're 19. How are you going to do as the youth director's wife? Now, these are teenagers that know you as Sue. And we decided they'll still know me as Sue. That's not going to change. And it worked really well. For us, it worked really well, picking up that responsibility. There was a lot of growing for both of us, for sure.
Of course, absolutely. So when you looked ahead at your married life, were children, was that the part of the conversation? Were you hoping to have a big family?
There's a lot of laughter here.
Yeah. I come from a large family. I'm the youngest of 6, and Sue's the youngest of 3. And I always thought whenever I did get married, I'd have a bunch of kids just because that's what I was used to. But unfortunately, we were too ignorant and immature at the time to sit down and really talk about kids.
We probably didn't talk about that. No. I don't remember that conversation, but we both knew we wanted children. I'm sure we talked about that.
Just not as fast as they came.
John would have had 10 children easily. He loves big families. His family is amazing and wonderful, and they wrapped their arms around me from day one. We would have had more children, but after Rachel was born, she required so much care and so much effort in all ways, physically, emotionally, that I couldn't do that. I knew that I was probably done. I was afraid any new baby would take away from the attention and care that I could give her.
Right.
It was really hard for me to even think about having another baby. Of course, years down the road, we wish we'd had 4 or 5 more, but we had 3.
But 3 wonderful girls, and yeah.
So she was your third daughter?
Yes.
Okay. And what was her diagnosis?
It changed a little bit depending on where we were, where we could get better care, that they knew the situation better. At first, they knew that there were problems. It was a process. This was 30 years ago. They could not do the broad chromosome testing like they could now. They had to pick and choose. They picked 5, and it was negative for all 5, but they knew there was an issue. And then,
what were you noticing?
She was really floppy. She was really floppy.
And no muscle tone.
No, she couldn't cry. She would open her mouth, but no sound would come out. The nurses, before we even left the hospital, picked up on a lot of things that I didn't even. They said, honey, she's not getting enough milk. I was breastfeeding. I thought, she's getting plenty. They just don't know. And I had already breastfed 2 daughters, so I thought, she's doing fine.
This.
Yeah, I got this. But they said, no, she's not. And we realized she wasn't. Her sucking mechanism had not fully developed. She was not able to get the milk. So we had to go to a bottle, small bottle. They wouldn't release her until she could take a certain amount of cc's before they would let her go home, just to make sure she was getting enough nutrition.
Right. So what were some of the immediate concerns that your family was having, like within the first year or 2? I mean, what were some of the needs that were hitting your family?
Definitely.
Sanity.
Yeah.
Sanity.
I mean, life, you hear the phrase a new normal, and it was a new normal overnight. Our other daughters were 7 and 10 when Rach was born. And I was gone all the time. I was at the Christian school, and I was with youth group, and I was with choir, and I wasn't home a lot. And so those first few years, I think a lot was on Sue, and she did most of the medical work, contacting doctors. We knew within 8 months that we better go see a specialist. And it's just serious issues.
They did not have in place some of the programs that they have now, where now when a baby's born that way in the hospital, there's all kinds of programs, even in smaller ones. They'll right away get you connected and plugged in with different paths that you need to take.
Yeah.
At that point, they didn't really. So we were sort of on our own for that. At first, I think I got so tired of the idea of having a child with disabilities. Within the first few weeks, I was done with contacting anybody. I just wanted to take this baby home, and we were home by then, of course, but take her, love her, treat her like she's our new baby. Let's just love her.
Yes.
I couldn't do anything beyond that. Fortunately, it was a good friend of mine who contacted United Cerebral Palsy, which is not what Rachel had, but they still send therapists out to the home, and she got us plugged into that right away. I couldn't do that at the time.
So you had a good advocate.
We did, and we had other good friends who took our other 2 girls and would do fun things with them. There was a lot of guilt involved. There was there was guilt that you just weren't spending enough time with your other two. Mm-hmm. That you'd look at this little child, and to some extent, I think I felt that. I think we both did. Her whole life, we were exhausted.
At 8 months, she had her first surgery. Had her head opened up and a shunt put in and a tumor removed. And that was one of close to 40 surgeries she had on her head. And through the years, and she had multiple shunts in her head, and they malfunctioned and would get infected. And yeah, it was...
She started her seizures then, I think, at about a year and a half.
I forgot about the seizures.
Those were pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
She had grand mal seizures. And for a tiny little child like that, the medical system in our area was great. We called the 911 so many times, and they came always within 2 minutes. They were there. But they had to do drastic things. She was little. They couldn't get a veins. They would just slice into her ankle one time and opened it up. I think, though, those early days were so hard, and we were learning so much and coming to grips with what it was going to look like down the road. Both of us already had a strong relationship with Christ before that happened, and that's what saved us, was when the dark times came with her, and there were so many that were hard, that we already had that. It was not, we didn't do everything right, and it wasn't always great. We made a lot of mistakes with our relationship too, but I think you'd say too, that's what kept it together, was we had already had that.
It was the Lord that kept us together. And our church family at that time, there were 2 or 3 couples that were real close, and they kind of kept us under their wing and, so how you guys doing? And so, at Christmas, you'd be a knock on the door, and there'd be bags and bags of presents.
Oh, they were so good to us.
And and the person was already gone, dropped them and ran, and we you had told the girls there's just not going to be a whole lot this Christmas, and then the doorbell rings and there's bags and bags, and those are the times you look back and you go, okay, God, thank you so much. That was
He had his eyes on you. He was caring for you through the church.
Yeah, and our other 2 girls, Melissa and Katie, they learned so much and became so compassionate, and their hearts just broke at the sight of someone with a handicap, and not just broke, but their hearts and minds softened because they saw Rach. They saw her get carried out of our house. I can't tell you how many times on a gurney, And both Sue and I each have had to revive Rachel with CPR from a seizure, and so they saw all those things and lived through all those things, and they both are, Melissa and Katie, both incredibly passionate right now, because of, and so are we, of course, because of Rach.
Anyone who is different. Yeah, it really impacted.
And we wouldn't be
lives.
here, if it weren't for Rach and all that she meant to us, and how she impacted our lives through the years. We could tell you so many stories that have you laughing and crying. It's just, she was just an incredible personality. And
and I think there's a perception. If you're a teacher at a Christian school and you're pastoring and you're working together in the church, people think, oh, they have it all together. Yes, they have a child with a disability, but I'm sure they're doing fine. And they don't know the day in and day out kinds of care and even life-saving measures that you're taking and that you're really exerting for your daughter to keep her alive.
No one really knows that unless you are in the immediate family. We've realized that even our friends who are close to us, dear friends for years, our children grew up together, they did not know what it was like. We have a really good friend who's a fire captain, who was our right-hand medical person all of her life. And he actually offered to stay a couple of nights with her while we went away. His wife was a teacher, so she was not in on that. It was just him. And the first night there, he said, oh my goodness, it took me 45 minutes just to use the lift, the Hoyer lift, and get her into bed. How do you guys do it?
Yes.
It takes us about 6. We could go through that.
6 minutes.
They just...
You got it down to a science.
They didn't get it at her service.
But it's about routine, and it's about a comfortability, and that so many things can happen that are unexpected. Did you ever feel really vigilant in your care for her, that you're kind of always mindful of what could happen and protecting her?
I think it was like that all the time. definitely with her.
Because she had a seizure disorder, and in her seizure disorder malady, she would stop breathing.
Yeah, that was the big issue with her
it wasn't just a seizure,
seizures.
it was she would stop breathing. And we had, I don't know how many times we had to do this. It was, okay, we're going to the hospital. I mean, we would see a shunt malfunctioning. We could tell. We knew all the symptoms. And it was, basically we just said, here we go. And we would have to leave her in the bed while we quickly got all of our stuff together, called the hospital and said, we're coming.
I think that was one of the things that contributed to the exhaustion that any parent with a child like that feels.
Yeah,
is you're always
on.
You're always vigilant. We could log so many hours and did log so many hours of just watching her. You're watching her breathe and you're thinking, do we go? Do we not go? What's wrong here? You get to where you know that child so well, and the doctors that know you know that child so well. And they will ask you, they will follow your lead. Do you think she's sick? Yeah, something's going on here that we can't handle. This is different. We need you to look at such and such, And by the time we brought her in, she never went into the doctor for colds, flu, anything like that. It was always something major. The other things you could handle yourself. But that really contributed to emotional and mental fatigue.
Well, and even in the presence of doctors, there's not a sense where you can say, oh, okay, finally, someone else knows better than we do. I mean, they were relying upon you. And so even then you're on.
Yeah. And you're glad for that. If you found a doctor, which fortunately God gave us great doctors, and they almost always worked with us. We knew the anesthesiologist so well. They asked about our other children and we'd ask about theirs. And
that's good.
It was a big help. At one point when she had a massive infection of everything, all the tubing and things in her body, the neurosurgeon brought us in and conferred with the radiologist. We were all poring over the ultrasound and the x-rays together saying, okay, where's the break in the shunt tubing, trying to find it. And until the four of us came up with, this is it, this is where it is. And they included us in that. They knew that we had seen so many of these. We knew what to look for too. And even after her surgeries, is she okay? There were multiple times when she had to go right back into surgery within 24 hours. We never even left the hospital. She had to go back in. And sometimes they would say, I was always in the hospital with her. I never left her. So sometimes they'd say, the scans are coming out clear. And I would have to say, I don't care. She's not right. Something's not.
You knew it.
Yeah, you knew your child. And they would go back in and open her up and say, yep, you're right. It was clogged.
Thank God they listened to you.
Blocked. We were just, it's a blessing to have a children's hospital. So close within an hour, a little over an hour. They were great.
So in what ways did caring for your daughter's needs impact your marriage?
I think a lot of it, Crystal, came back to me that I was ignorant of all that Sue was doing. And I was in my ministry world. And it's not that I ignored her or Rachel. Loved them both, spent lots of time with them. But I think I was missing all that Sue was doing, how fatigued she was getting, and how happy I was in ministry. I've got another event to go to. I have another meeting to plan. There was a span there where it was all about John. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. Sue looking at me, and Sue wasn't threatening to divorce me. She just said, I can't do this anymore. You have got to participate in this. And again, she wasn't accusing me. She was just saying, I need you more.
This is what I need.
I need you to help me with Rachel. You're providing for our family. You're making sure everything's fixed around the house. The car is taken care of with oil changes. But I need you with Rach, and I'm not getting that. A lot of it was me recognizing that I had to stop focusing on me and my ministry and take Sue and Rachel as more important than my ministry. I had been raised in the burnout for Jesus, amen, and that makes you really spiritual.
Right.
And that's what I was living. What a dream. I was nonstop. And
ministry looks like this. It looks like the outreaches. It looks like the Bible studies rather than maybe what's happening in the home.
Right.
in hindsight, we learned this. The biggest ministry we had was there were so many people that told us, we watched you. We were watching you. We watched you. We thought, oh my goodness. I don't think we realized that was probably the biggest ministry. In the early days, the first few years, it was such a shock. And there was a lot of fear, but it's like anything else in your walk, in your Christian walk. There's always things that pop up. There's other things besides a disability that will provoke fear and shock and fatigue. And, it was a huge financial drain too. Mm-hmm. Even when you have the blessing that we do in this country of being plugged into government programs that we all contribute to as a people to help situations like that.
Right.
And we were plugged into some good ones. There's still a huge financial drain. Yeah. It kept me from going back to work, which we had planned on my income all along. So in those early days, not only were we dealing with the exhaustion and the fear and heartbrokenness of dealing with this little new baby. John was working 4 jobs at the time just to bring in enough money. And I remember one time, I even remember where we were standing in the house. We both just had a breakdown. We sobbed and held on to each other. And it was a crucial time for us. We decided then that, you know what? If we don't believe that God can handle this, if we don't believe that this God has this planned already as part of our story, then we need to stop wasting time with this whole church thing, stop taking our kids to Sunday school, stop all of that, because it's pointless. But if we do believe, then we keep going, then we believe that God will hold us, He will not drop us. And that's what we did. We just trusted that God's got this. He's going to make something of this. He's going to take care of us. That was the biggest thing that helped our marriage.
So what brought you to the point of saying to John, hey, I need you. I need more of you?
I decided between God and I that, no, we're in this. I'm not letting him go. I just want more. And I believed that God would give me more. And so wanting more, I'm not letting go of this. I want more, and I believe you can do it. So the strength to come back and and communicate that with John, part of that comes from realizing that God loved me as much as he did him.
Yes.
John was the one who had gone to the Bible school. He was the one that was in charge of everything, could do everything.
Because I was wonderful. Remember?
I finished high school. That was it. And because we had little ones so soon, I was not able to go back to school. It took me a while to realize, okay, wait a minute. He's wonderful, but I had to realize that whoa, God is bigger than this.
Amen.
There's more. This can be better than this. And communicating that to John, if he knew what it was, if he knew and got it, he would do it. I never doubted that.
You trusted that.
Yeah, absolutely, because he loved God so much, and I knew he loved me, but he just wasn't getting it. It did take a lot of conversations.
Unpleasant conversations.
Not always fun.
They weren't fun for me. That's all because, I thought I was doing God's work.
But fairly respectful.
Oh, yeah.
To each other in those conversations.
We never yelled at each other. We have never been yellers. But there was a time where we stopped raising Rachel individually and we became a team. And some of it has to do, it's why when she had a seizure and it was time to go to the hospital, we looked at each other and went, let's go. We got this. And
Together.
boom, 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 boom. Yeah. We were in the van either following an ambulance or we had her with us. And we just knew this is the two of us. We got this. Because Our other girls were grown and out of the house. Through all of it, we became a team. God did some great things.
We had a friend back then in those early days who had a son. They were part of our church that he had Down syndrome. And she said to us at one time, if she could go back and choose to have him born without Downs, she wouldn't change a thing. And I remember thinking, oh, boy, I am not at that point.
Right.
And I don't know that I ever got to that point where I would have said that to God. But I looked at us and I looked at our other girls and so many people that Rachel and who she was influenced. I wouldn't want to change that. I wouldn't want to give that up. What God did in our lives, in our girls' lives, and also other people, it was only accomplished through her. Having those struggles, I wouldn't want to give that up.
Wow. And only the Spirit of God in you can bring you to the point of really embracing that,
Absolutely.
to see the impact for eternity that she had in people who were watching. So, John, I'm interested to know how your ministry shifted kind of at that point where you two said, okay, it's not you're doing this and I'm doing this, we're doing this together, that team mode. What did ministry look like for you? Because that means you had to make different choices, I'm assuming, about how you spent your time and where you were pulled.
I've been at this church here. We started the church in 2002, so 18 years ago. Before that, I was not a senior pastor. I was on staff somewhere. And I was always packed to the gills with probably 5 different hats.
Right.
And in all different areas: sports, music, teaching, administration, leadership, whatever. And I don't think it really was until Florida that in the last 18 years that I finally caught on that it's got to be me. She can, and she wasn't a nag, but I'll use that word. She could nag me and say, John, something needs to change. But it had to be me before God saying, okay, I am failing as a husband and father here more than I am in the ministry because all the things, all the events and areas of ministry were going well. Mm-hmm. So I must be successful. Look, each one of these is doing what I hope it to be doing.
Right.
But at home, I could it was a struggle to feel close to Sue because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing at home. Mm-hmm. Right. She just wanted me there. Mm-hmm. I just wasn't there. And what also happened way too often, Crystal, is I was there, but I wasn't there. In other words, I'm writing notes on my napkin for the next meeting. And so
You did do that. I remember that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Your mind was somewhere else.
My mind was
You weren't
somewhere else.
present. Yeah.
Preparing the next meeting or the next game or the next whatever. Yeah. And that was that didn't happen overnight, but that was a process in my heart where God had to change my priorities. Mm-hmm. It was a priority change where God got a hold of me and said, John, you are successful in these areas, but the number one area you're failing in, you are not being the husband that I want you to be. And
what was that? Direct answer to my prayer. Grabbing onto God,
the persistent prayers of a faithful woman. The Spirit of God is at work in all of us in various ways, but that's a beautiful thing. So I'm interested to know what it was like for the last few years you had with Rachel. It must have been precious years. Did you kind of sense that the end of her life here on earth is coming to a close?
Well, no, except for that we knew we were getting a little older. We knew that the day would come when we would not be able to care for her as well as we are now, which just breaks your heart, really. There are many parents, well, all over the world that we don't even know of, but even in our area that we knew, that face those same fears, what's going to happen. We had other daughters, that said, something happens to you guys, we will always take Rachel. Absolutely. She's not going into a home. We will always take her. But, as a mom and dad, you look at that and you know even in ways that they don't even know how that's going to impact and change their life. The year before she passed away, it was so tender of God that she had been so sick all summer long, respiratory illnesses, 6 weeks at a time, just healed up from that, went back to school, and within 2 weeks, sick again for another 8 weeks. And our pediatrician, who's an internist, her doctor, he sat us down and said, look, you guys are going to have to start thinking about how much you're putting her through. With everything that you're doing, it's getting harder and harder for her. How far do you want to go just to save her life? It shocked us because she's a child. Even though she was 27, mentally she was always a little 3-year-old. So for us, she was our little kid always. And you do anything to save a child's life, anything. And we have. And so when it came time, right before her passing, she got sick really fast. It wasn't even one of the worst. We didn't see it coming. She just within 3 days started turning gray and couldn't breathe. She died from complications from pneumonia. But did we see it before then? I don't know. Thank goodness we had the year before where the doctor at least started to get us to think about end of life. Children like that, kids like that often will die not because of their disability or their syndrome, but because of complications that come because of that. They're in a wheelchair all their lives. Their organs don't develop properly. Things get twisted around in there. She had extremely low muscle tone, hypotonic, so her ability to even cough out secretions was limited.
There were several times when Rachel was near death. And Sue, like I said, Sue spent a lot of the time in the hospital with her, all the time in the hospital, and I was in and out when I could get there. But Sue has shared with me that there were many times that she thought Rachel was gone. And she said, not now, God. Don't take her now.
I had told God.
Yeah, you can take her, just not now. And so she had that conversation with God.
You were not ready.
She wasn't. We weren't ready, but Sue being right there over top of her, watching her all the time.
Yes.
God, I know you love me. I know you love Rachel. I know where she's going, but just not this time.
It was never an anger at God issue because we had already talked about that. God and I had already talked about that. That I would tell him, okay, we have taken our hands off again, that you can take her when you think it's your timing. But then every time she got sick or her shunt malfunctioned and we had to take her to the hospital, I would always say, but not now, not this time, Lord, not this time. So finally, I don't know if it was a year or two before she passed, I remember talking to God and just saying, you know I'm going to say that every time, right? I am. You're going to have to do what you feel's best. I'm okay with that. You do what you feel's best. So when she died, people said, were you angry with God? Well, no, how could I be angry with God? I had already had this conversation. We had already talked back and forth. I'd already told him, you got my heart. You take her when you think it's best. I won't know. I won't know that. You will.
But we knew then it was so
releasing.
It was when she got sick on a Saturday.
She went to school Friday.
She didn't look great Saturday. Sue kept her home from church Sunday. Monday night, we said, okay, we need to get her in. And we took her up to the hospital, and, we were kidding with her out in the waiting room, and
but she was not breathing well.
She was not breathing well.
At that point.
And the nurse came out and took her blood pressure and said, oh my goodness, get a room. And pshoom, she was in. And the charge nurse looked at us and said, we're done here. Are you? And that was Monday morning. Tuesday morning, like 2 o'clock in the morning, we had called our daughters. They were already both on the way down. I mean, if they had stopped bagging her right there, I think she would have passed away right there in the ER. But I don't know. We just didn't feel it was God's timing. We wanted our other daughters to get down. So they intubated her and kept her alive on the machine for a while. And we spent the week with her there. And Friday, our doctor, the same doctor who had cared for her for years, said there's nothing else we can do.
How have you grieved together as a couple?
Differently. We've admitted we grieve differently. I don't even know if I could define it or describe it. After Rach passed away, a guy from our church that we knew really well took us out to dinner, and he had recently lost his wife, and he was talking about grief, and he said, let me give this to you. And he gave us a little piece of paper, and he said, I got this from the funeral director I had the service for his wife. And it's I don't know exactly what it is word for word, but it's something along the line of grief is a passage. It's not a place to stay. And it's not something to feel bad about. It's the price of love. And so that's still on our fridge, and we still look at that. And I understand that it's 2.5 years has gone by, and I'm not grieving any more than Sue is.
I cry in private. I don't know why. John cries in front of anyone.
I'm a marshmallow.
And it's okay.
I've gone to pieces in front of the church and apologized, and they have spoken out in church. Said, John, don't apologize. This is you. This is why we love you, because you're real, and you don't hide. And I don't.
No.
duh, here I am crying. And
I don't think I cry in private because I'm trying to cover that up. I think there's too many distractions. I'm a real people person. When I'm around other people, I'm happy. It's when I'm by myself that those emotions, those thoughts come flooding in, and then I have the freedom to cry.
we often, too, and this is an interesting, I'll say phenomenon, I'm sure it's not a phenomenon, but we'll be around the house and you can just tell in the other one that it's a tender day. So I don't know, and I don't know what it is, but you look at each other across the room and you just get up and go sob. And we'll look at each other and go, what was that all about? I don't know. It was just something. There's the day she passed that we know the exact date and the time, and then there's her birthday that are really sad moments. But then there's things around the house that we have that I haven't touched and haven't moved. Her clothes in the closet are all still there, and probably some people think that's weird.
Things that you would have looked at other people before and think that's weird. Yeah. But now it's not weird. It's kind of, we don't need to. I just don't want to do that. So we don't. We definitely have given each other the permission, unspoken, to be however you need to be. John will
and that's
will
been
talk
healthy.
a lot.
That's a good marriage.
There's been no accusation back and forth. Well, what are you crying for? It's always been...
Or, it's been this long, we should move on from this.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that odd? It is odd. It's 2.5 years. The first year was the hardest. But even now, there are times we miss her so much, just like before. The first year, he would walk through the house and he would right before bed, it seemed like right before bed, he would all of a sudden want to talk about her and start crying. And I'd think, well, we're different. You will let this go and you'll be good. I will be up all night. I will be awake all night long now.
And
but
some of that was because
that,
at bedtime, she had a routine and we would take turns every other night.
Well, that was my question. I mean, this has to change the daily routines of your life.
Oh, unbelievable.
You were caregivers, maybe even as at your identity, at the core of your identity, you were caregivers.
Sure. We weren't just mom and dad. We were,
Because I think we change our identities, have to, more than men.
I would agree with that. Mm-hmm. I know that's not true across the board, but generally speaking.
I think so too, because, we are, regardless of what we're involved in ministry or if we have a career, we're still known by our children mostly.
Sure.
Oh, you're so-and-so's mom. I mean, think of how much that is involved in our identity.
It's very relational.
Yeah, it really is. So we were always Rachel's mom and dad. It was always Rachel's mom and dad, Rachel's mom and dad. In different venues, in our church ministry community and in the disabled community in our area. And to lose her, you felt like you just lost your ticket. You lost your ticket to the disabled community. And everyone says, no, you didn't. You could still be a part of it, but you're not. It's different. It's different now. So it's very different still now, but we're involved in a different way. We are involved. We will always be involved. We'll always have that passion and that heart, but we're involved in a different way.
But we volunteer a couple times a year at her what's called Challenger Baseball, which is probably 40 disabled kids who have a special field that they go play on, and so you buddy up with one of the kids.
Yes, I've heard of that. Sounds so much fun.
It is. It's fun for those kids, but what it does for those parents too to know, oh, you care about my child. Huge. That is so huge. I remember feeling that way. Oh, you care about my child. Makes a huge impact on parents.
Well, has your marriage changed as you've adjusted to life without Rachel?
Well, maybe some of that is new identity, but I think, when something like that happens, you do a lot of looking back. You don't stay in the past, but you look back and you reevaluate. And so we worked pretty good as a team. God was good at that. And since then, I think we both made the commitment. John had to make that commitment that, okay, what we do together, even with this, with what we're doing with Word of Life and what we're doing with Joni and Friends, the Beyond Suffering curriculum, it was, I'm not doing this without you. He said that what we do, we'll do together or we won't do it. So that was huge. That was a
that was
big
good for
step.
me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we've needed each other. I think that was going
That's a
back
lot
to
of
our
it,
marriage in the early stages. when she was born, the petty things that bugged us about each other before were just not that important. And we knew many couples, we knew quite a few couples personally in the disabled community that they were split up. So it would either...
Divorce rate is so high. It's
it would either
devastating.
divide you or bring you closer together. And praise God, for us, we needed each other. We clung to each other. We needed that support and everything else that went along with it. So when she passed, we knew that it was something we were totally together on the same page. If we hadn't been, that would be devastating.
Definitely, yeah.
But we were on the same page there. And since then, we feel like the third musketeer is gone, not leaving out the two other girls. But for sure, the last 20 years was just the three of us. And it was a whole different family dynamic, the three of us. It was like constantly caring for a little 3-year-old. But at times she'd act like a teenager.
Well, it sounds like you have many memories of your daughter, Rachel. And as we close our time together, I just love to hear just about some of the ways God is leading you both now at this very different season in your life. I mean, you've really sensed a call to go back and minister around the world to people impacted by disability. What's that going to look like for you in this new season of life?
We have always enjoyed the Word of Life ministry and been part of it for years and years, but with Rach, it didn't allow either of us to travel on behalf of Word of Life. But when Rach passed away, we hooked up with Word of Life. We knew many of the leaders, and they said, we'd love to have you come teach in our Bible Institutes. And so that was kind of where we started. And again, that was what I said, Sue, I'm not going without you, Sue. Even if I'm just going to go teach, we can minister to the couples, to the students, as a couple who has made it. We've been through this, not just a handicapped child, but at that point, maybe almost 40 years of ministry, and we still like each other, and that's a monument often in ministry circles.
Yes, it is, sadly.
Yeah, sadly. Interesting enough, when we were in Africa, every couple that we counseled with, one of their first questions was, how'd you guys stay together?
Right.
Not just in ministry, but in ministry with a handicapped child. How did you do that? And each place that we go, we find that our lives and our walk with Christ and our marriage and our dealing with Rachel and 2 other daughters is what people are impressed with more than anything. They just want to, how did God do that through you? But what we see now in the future, and again, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm 65. I know I only look, 30, but I'm 65, so I'm near retirement sometime in the next few years. Yeah. So something like traveling with Word of Life and teaching and taking Johnny with us and the Beyond Suffering curriculum is something we can do till we stop breathing on this earth. I mean, it's because we love people. I love to teach, and we love to communicate, and we have the legacy of Rachel to take with us. And then you get to Africa.
You've been reinvigorated for.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole
chapter
new
of your life.
It's a whole new chapter, phase, or whatever you want to say. It's a whole new challenge. It's a whole new ministry. But then you get to Africa and you're there for a little while, and they find out your story, and then they say, "Okay, we want you to share your story with everybody." And you think, "Okay, we didn't come here just to teach. We came here to minister, but then to take Rachel's legacy with us." And so we shared it in Uganda. We shared it in Ukraine, to a room filled with mothers of handicapped children whose husbands had left them and wondered how are we still together when their husbands have walked out. And so you say, oh, there's number 2. And then we go to Bulgaria and you get a chance to minister. I'm anxious to share with whomever. I mean, whoever walks in the door, whoever comes to either a Bible Institute or to a pastor's challenge for a weekend.
People want to know that God is real in the midst of their suffering.
Yeah.
And so you can be a good Bible teacher, but until you've seen God's faithfulness with your own eyes and experienced it and have years to look back, that's what people want to hear. That's what people want to know.
Right.
We can trust God's word, and look, we've lived it.
Yeah.
And that's what you're
We
giving.
have a unique perspective. And as a team, the 2 of us together, I think God will use us in, if we only take one more trip and then he calls us home, whatever. But I think we have an incredible opportunity to make an impact in the disability community and in the lives of others for Christ. So we're excited.
Thank you for listening today. If you've been inspired by our conversations or have a comment about something you heard, please drop me a message at podcast@joniandfriends.org. I would love to hear from you. You can also find all of the resources that we've mentioned at joniandfriends.org/podcast. To get our next conversation automatically, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Crystal Keating, and thank you for listening to the Joni and Friends Ministry Podcast.